Today we're diving into 10 conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. Load up your VPN, grab your tinfoil hat, and let's begin. Project Sunshine. After the detonation of the atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the US government conducted an investigative study to calculate and measure the effects of nuclear fallout on human beings. Despite testing the weaponry in various ways at various times, the full effect on the human body was still not known. The purpose of the study, once considered to be a conspiracy, has now been proven as fact. In 1955, after a meeting of the Atomic Energy Commission, scientists from the Sunshine Conference, who gauged the long-term consequences of atomic weaponry, agreed to the sampling of the chemical element strontium, or SR, in humans. Researchers were asked to obtain the findings carefully by identifying and collecting tissue and bone samples from their targets, whilst keeping their intentions vague and top secret from victims' families. After the transcript of the conference's meeting was published and thus released to the public in 1995, it clearly stated the sinister agenda for obtaining body parts from atomic bomb victims. Dr. Willard Libby, who was a member of the commission, stated, "I do say that it is a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group, so human samples are of prime importance. In the end, it is recorded that more than 1,500 samples were secretly obtained from aptly named body snatcher groups, many of which were taken from the bodies of dead babies. One particular case related to a stillborn baby whose legs were severed and deposited to labs by researchers in the UK. The grieving mother was told that she could not dress her own baby for its funeral in order to keep the operation top secret and reduce the risk of being exposed. The cover story from researchers, scientists, and officials from the committee was that the body parts were required for measuring natural levels of radium within the population in the wake of Hiroshima. Dr. Libby would go on to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry before eventually being named in the abhorrent project. Government mind control. Between the years 1953 and 1964, the US government, particularly a group within the CIA, conducted top-secret experiments on human beings in an attempt to control the minds of their subjects through the use of hallucinogenic drugs. Popular television shows such as Stranger Things have highlighted the program known as MKUltra, where it is said that over 150 experiments were carried out on humans via psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapy in order to manipulate and control the mind, body, and actions of their examinees. Many believe the CIA's ultimate agenda was to create so-called super soldiers, similar to those portrayed in the film The Manchurian Candidate, to infiltrate and assassinate those who the government considered a threat to national security. In November 1953, Frank Olson, a CIA scientist, drank a cocktail which had secretly been laced with LSD. A few days later, he fell to his death from the window of a New York City hotel room. The authorities would rule out any foul play, claiming it to be a suicide. However, in 1994, Olson's family demanded a second autopsy, where it was found that certain injuries occurred on his body before the fall. This sparked outrage and a subsequent conspiracy theory that Olson was aware of the MKUltra project and was ultimately killed by his associates. His family was awarded a settlement of $750,000, as well as a personal apology from then President Gerald Ford and CIA Director William Colby. This hasn't stopped the conspiracies from mounting up and is regularly discussed on group chats as well as being portrayed on screen. Despite eventual admission and acknowledgement from the government, the CIA conveniently destroyed the majority of MKUltra records after the project was shut down in 1973. It is noted, however, that many victims of those terrifying experiments were left with permanent mental and physical disabilities. John Lennon was under government surveillance. This is an interesting one. We all know that celebrities have a major influence on popular opinion, politics, and society as a whole. John Lennon, the trailblazing singer-songwriter, became famous for not only being one of the Fab Four with the Beatles, but as an anti-war hero amongst his peers. Songs such as Imagine and Happy Xmas, War Is Over climbed the charts and became a rallying cry for millions of protesters across America. It also stamped a large target on Lennon's back. Between 1971 and 1972, during Richard Nixon's presidency, a file was raised on Lennon by the president himself due to his concerns that the singer's connection to anti-Vietnam War activist leaders and songs would ultimately lead to the country's collapse. Lennon's activities, public appearances, and daily whereabouts were constantly monitored. His words and actions considered to be a threat to Nixon's administration and potential catalyst for a major uprising within society. The administration would refuse to declassify the file for decades for fear of retaliation, and after the release of Give Peace a Change, would eventually move to deport Lennon from the United States. The Immigration and Naturalization Services claimed that the ex-Beatle had pleaded guilty to cannabis possession in 1968, and therefore should never have been granted residency in America in the first place. John Wiener, a professor and historian, spent 14 years investigating the subject, and even wrote a book on Lennon's surveillance titled Gimme Some Truth: The John Lennon FBI Files. Wiener, who had numerous conversations with the FBI on the matter, was finally able to persuade the Bureau to release the documents they had on the famous singer. After the release of the documents in 1997, Mark Rosenbaum, legal director of the ACLU of Southern California, stated that the release of these final documents, concealed from public view for nearly a quarter of a century, reveals government paranoia at a pathological level and an attempt to shield executive branch abuse of civil liberties under rubric of national security. Lennon was murdered on the 8th of December 1980 after being shot by Mark David Chapman, who many believe was part of another conspiracy altogether. In any case, the music of John Lennon lives on in the hearts and minds of millions. The Dalai Lama and the CIA. Keeping with the theme of famous faces and their connection to US intelligence agencies, our next entry poses the bizarre question: was the Dalai Lama a CIA agent? On the face of it, the proposal sounds crazy and comical to an extent. The Dalai Lama is a man of inner peace who preaches goodwill and promotes well-being in all aspects of life. The spiritual leader is the last person one would imagine to be in cahoots with a central intelligence agency. Well, the answer to this question is yes, kind of. The Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959 after a failed uprising against a Chinese military occupation, which began 9 years earlier. At the time, the CIA conducted its own operation in support of the mountainous region's independence movement, in order to sabotage the infrastructure and overall agenda of the communist government in China. It has since been confirmed through declassified documents that the Dalai Lama's internal network received $1.7 million each year throughout the 1960s from the United States in order to fund the Tibetan resistance. The financial aid was spent on secretive training programs at Camp Hale in Eagle County, Colorado, for volunteers to prepare them for guerrilla operations, and also used to arm and support the retaliation efforts from the Tibetan government. However, Tibetan officials had to deny that the Dalai Lama personally profited from the financial assistance, where it is said that he received an annual subsidy of $180,000. Though it acknowledged the receipt of the large figure, respondents state that this money was used in establishing and the building of their offices in both Geneva and New York. Codename ST Circus, the Tibetan Resistance Project trained approximately 259 Tibetans in total at Camp Hale, many of whom were parachuted back into Tibet to conduct both military and intelligence gathering tasks, to defend their homeland and infiltrate the communist movements of China and their allies. Many people died in the process of such operations, and as with every war, many would profit too. Who benefited specifically is another topic for another day, and is still up for debate. The sugar industry agenda. In today's modern world, fitness and well-being is big business. From food supplements, gym memberships to personal trainers and detailed diet plans, the battle against the equally enormous junk food industry has never been so fierce. However, back in the 1960s, the competition focused mainly on what was worse for the human body, as opposed to what would contribute to our health. Cigarettes, alcohol, and dietary products were commonplace and received the biggest advertising push from corporate industries. In 2016, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, made the shocking discovery, which was already being discussed amongst conspiracy theorists, that the Sugar Research Foundation paid scientists to promote their product, knowing the health risks that it posed to humans. In 1967, Harvard study by the association clearly identifies the whitewashing of sugar's impact on the heart and the subsequent blame that pointed towards saturated fats as being the main culprit for the increase in heart disease across the population. In 1954, the president of the SRF gave a speech proposing the idea that if Americans could be persuaded to eat a lower fat diet, they would need to replace the fat with an alternative, in this case sugar. The plan seemed to work as sugar consumption skyrocketed amongst the population, and a year later, after an article suggested a link between sucrose and coronary heart disease, members of the SRF paid approximately $50,000 in today's money for research and peer-reviewed publishing to support their product. Stephen Glantz, co-author of the Harvard study, told the New York Times newspaper that it was a very smart thing the sugar industry did, because review papers, especially if you get them published in a very prominent journal, tend to shape the overall scientific discussion. Despite there being no concrete evidence to prove the transactions were made to pay off scientists, Coca-Cola has also been in the spotlight for similar antics, seemingly paying researchers millions of dollars to quash the link between sugary drinks and obesity. In 2015, the New York Times obtained emails confirming the attempts made by those at Coca-Cola to minimize the speculation in order to increase their sales, sponsorship, and advertising. Perhaps not the most surprising of conspiracy theories, however, it is certainly true and should be a lesson to the next generation who wish to live healthier lives. This should make you question whether or not the foods you crave on a day-to-day basis are the actual foods your body needs or the ones you're being told to eat. The CIA's heart attack gun. This next entry sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it is not quite what you may think. We're back to conspiracy theorists' favourite go-to culprit, the CIA. In 1975, a testimony by the CIA revealed the existence of a handgun which had the ability to disguise an agent's kill shot and give the impression that the enemy suffered a heart attack. Agency Director William Colby and Idaho Senator Frank Church produced the firearm and described its capability to shoot frozen darts, which contained shellfish toxins within its bullet casings. These toxins were capable of leaving behind a residue that pointed towards cardiac arrest. Constructed from a modified M1911 handgun with scope, the so-called heart attack gun included a battery in the handle, used electricity to fire, and had an effective range of up to 100 meters. The weapon was part of a secret project nicknamed Project MK Naomi, whose purpose was to investigate the possibilities and methods of using biological, chemical, and undetectable weaponry against its enemy. A leading researcher on the project, Mary Embry, discussed these findings in an interview after witnessing its creation. Embry worked for the CIA after graduating from high school, working her way up from secretary to creating surveillance equipment, and eventually being promoted to the Office of Technical Services, where she was asked to find an undetectable poison for a top-secret project. From there, tests were conducted on animals and prisoners at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and led by Dr. Nathan Gordon, a CIA chemist. Mixed with water, the toxins, once fired from the gun, would penetrate the body without perception, similar to a mosquito bite, where they would melt into the person's body and induce cardiac arrest. A very scary thought, I'm sure you will all agree. Though it was considered a test project and weaponry systems have come a long way since the 1970s, it makes you wonder what they will come up with next, or have done since this time. in the interest of national security, of course. Planned obsolescence. This next one will infuriate many, especially at a time of high inflation and cost of living crisis across the world. Have you ever noticed telephones' batteries draining much quicker than it used to? How about your smart TV taking longer to load and update? What you're experiencing is something called planned obsolescence. In recent years, tech giant Apple had to disclose that its iPhone 6 and 6S models would not cope with the update procedures, thus resulting in draining batteries and sluggish performance. This has resulted in class action lawsuits against the popular brand. However, the issue itself is a global problem relating to thousands of products and companies and dates back to the 1920s. So what is planned obsolescence? Simply put, the term relates to a strategy which companies use in their manufacturing departments to deliberately build low durability products which will inevitably deplete over a relatively short period of time to force consumers to invest in newer updated versions or models. It first began when the president of General Motors, Alfred P. Sloan, came up with an idea to compete with fellow automobile titan Ford, whereby a similar strategy called dynamic obsolescence was formed. Sloan believed that an annual model of their motor car would entice customers to invest in the latest model, even though the durability and performance of the current model was still considered to be satisfactory. In 1932, real estate agent Bernard London wrote a paper where he suggested further methods to generate sales and mass consumption during the Great Depression era, coining the term planned obsolescence in the article. A general conspiracy at the time of the paper, the phrase and process was most likely in motion 10 years earlier, as in 1924, a meeting of the main manufacturers of light bulbs in Geneva gave rise to what has become known as Phobos cartel. The select group decided to lower costs, materials and the life expectancy of light bulbs to 1,000 hours from 2,500 hours, all the while raising prices without the possibility of repercussions. The Sentinel light bulb, which was first turned on in 1901, is still active today and is proof that with the right materials, such products can be long-lasting for consumers. However, those who did not adhere to the cartel's new depletive standards were heavily fined. And so the downgrading of manufacturing has led to the conspiracy. So next time you think your phone has a personal vendetta against you when it doesn't work properly, just remember you are not alone, and that this was the plan all along. Alcohol poisoning during Prohibition. It's no conspiracy that too much alcohol is bad for you. Alcohol poisoning is nothing new when it comes to binge drinking, but what about the poisoning of alcohol itself? On 17th of January 1920, the 18th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified to prohibit the sale of alcohol. This era of forbiddance became known as the Prohibition years, that enforced the banning of any and all manufacture, storage, transportation, sale, possession, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. The period would last until 5th of December 1933 and the ratification of the amendment, but left behind a long-lasting fallout of criminal activity, death and chaos, many of which were orchestrated by the likes of Al Capone and Bugsy Siegel. Seemingly more concerned with the diminishing of alcohol consumption amongst the population, the government would go to extreme lengths to eradicate such a simple leisure, which we all take for granted nowadays. In 1926, newly added regulative measures required the manufacturers to include poisonous toxins to their products, such as benzene and mercury. A report from History.com website states that the federal government had required companies to denature industrial alcohol to make it undrinkable as early as 1906. But during Prohibition, it ordered them to add quinine, methyl alcohol, and other toxic chemicals as a further deterrent. Now considered an illicit underground business, sections of the mafia took this as their opportunity to capitalize and make an absolute fortune on the development, transport, and sale of such a sought-after product. Despite the inclusion of the toxins, it is estimated that approximately 10,000 people died from ingesting alcohol beverages during the Prohibition era, with countless others suffering major side effects, such as blindness from the illegal liquids. One such tragedy was reported in Time magazine, which states that on New Year's Day 1927, 41 people died at New York's Bellevue Hospital from alcohol-related poisonings. Many people thought the government would never put poisonous toxins into their alcohol, but they were wrong. Climate change and Exxon Mobil. As the war in Ukraine continues, gas prices, along with the cost of living crisis, seems to show no signs of going away or erasing anytime soon. No matter what time you tune into the news nowadays, it's always the same: climate change, poverty, war, AI, Armageddon. There is very rarely any good news. This attempt at keeping the population in a perpetual state of fear is another topic, as is the discussion of climate change, which divides the country. What we'll be discussing here is the theory that gas giant Exxon Mobil invested heavily into the study of climate change, then spent 27 years denying its existence. Researchers state that Exxon Mobil predicted global warming correctly and skillfully after more than 100 documents came to light, which state the gas company knew of its existence and implications from as early as the 1970s. The corporation, whose headquarters are based in Texas, invested heavily into groups that dismissed global warming, as well as the Global Climate Coalition, which pushed back against the Kyoto Protocol, a treaty that pledged to lower greenhouse gas emissions, despite knowing the consequences of its reality. It would take until 2007 before ExxonMobil acknowledged and accepted the dangers of climate change, but remained skeptical and distant from tackling it on the world stage. During the time of the initial denial, scientists from Exxon predicted an increase of 0.2 C each decade as a result of the emissions caused by gases from the burning of oil, coal, and other fossil fuels. The funding and investigative analysis published in Science confirmed that the organization's projections were extremely probable and were also consistent with, and at least as skillful as those of independent academic and government models. Geoffrey Supran, a historian and expert on archival documentation, said it was breathtaking to read Exxon's predictions and graphs from so long ago, considering they are so accurate. He states, "We now have the smoking gun showing that they accurately predicted warming years before they started attacking the science. These graphs confirm the complicity of what Exxon knew and how they misled." Climate scientist Natalie Mulholland of Cornell University in New York noted how the industry chose to deflect and ignore the importance of the information, some of which would have been significant in the fight against global warming. She is disheartened that they chose to endorse non-scientific ideas instead to delay action, likely in an effort to make more money. In response, a spokesperson for Exxon rejected the claims that its scientists were fully aware of the impact that greenhouse gases would have on the world, and referenced the conclusions from Judge Barry Ostraga of the New York State Supreme Court, who in 2019 stated, "What the evidence at trial revealed is that ExxonMobil executives and employees were uniformly committed to rigorously discharging their duties in the most comprehensive and meticulous manner possible, and that they demonstrated that ExxonMobil has a culture of disciplined analysis, planning, accounting, and reporting." This one still sounds like a conspiracy and continues to raise debate, especially in today's ever-changing world. The Testimony of Nayirah. Within the last decade, the term fake news has become commonplace amongst politicians, social media, and conspiracy theorists. However, the purporting of such falsities, not to mention political propagandist reports, have been around for hundreds of years. One example of the fake news phenomenon caused uproar and shockwaves across America when, in October 1990, a 15-year-old girl named Nayirah offered a horrifying testimony to the US Congressional Human Rights Caucus that turned out to be a staged act. According to the teenager, she claimed that she witnessed Iraqi soldiers extracting 15 Kuwaiti babies from incubators and dropping them on the floor, leaving them to die. Her declaration was purported and reiterated continually by then President George Bush Sr. in an attempt to gain public support for the Gulf War. Initially, her speech was heart-wrenching and shocked the nation when she stated, "I volunteered at the Al Aden Hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying." However, it has since been reported that the CIA requested that the young woman take acting lessons before her moment in the spotlight. It was also revealed that Nayirah herself was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, who worked with the Kuwaiti government during the Gulf War. In 1992, the New York Times found that the testimony was carefully coordinated by public relations firm Hill and Knowlton on behalf of the Citizens for a Free Kuwait movement. Its aim was to facilitate military support from the United States government. Millions of dollars changed hands after Nayirah's testimony was broadcast across the nations, reaching a mass audience of approximately 35 to 53 million Americans through the Media Link television conglomerate. The response from Iraq was swift, with Iraqi Information Minister Latif Nassif al-Jazam stating on October 16th, "Now you, Bush, are using what he, Sheikh Jabba, told you to make Congress ratify the budget, which is in the red because of your policies." Going on to state, "You as the president of a superpower have to weigh words carefully and not act as a clown who repeats what he is told." After the liberation of Kuwait in March 1991, reporters were given exclusive access to the country and its medical facilities. An ABC report found that the cause of death in infants was a result of the doctors and nurses fleeing from Iraqi troops, but that they almost certainly had not stolen hospital incubators and left hundreds of Kuwaiti babies to die. Human rights organization Amnesty International also found no such evidence and subsequently accused President Bush Sr. of opportunistic manipulation of the international human rights movement. When it comes to news, propaganda, and political power play, sometimes the most innocent of faces can be the most deceiving. In today's modern age of social media, deepfakes, and media manipulation, one must always question what they are told and why. So that's it for this video. We hope you found these 10 conspiracy theories, which turned out to be true, fascinating. We'd love to know your thoughts and theories below. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.